Vojtěch Hynais was born in 1854 in Vienna, but of Czech lineage. His father, a journeyman tailor, was an enthusiastic reader of Czech books and literature. After leaving school, Vojtěch entered the Academy of Fine Arts, to which the famous Anselm Feuerbach had just been appointed. Hynais was one of his favourite pupils, as may be seen from more than one of the well-known letters to his mother. When Professor Feuerbach returned from Rome in 1874, Vojtěch transferred to his atelier and invited him to work on the new Vienna Art Academy building, and was instrumental in Vojtěch receiving a scholarship to study in Rome. Vojtěch studied and copied the works of the old masters, particularly Tiepolo and Raphael. At the same time won the favour of the Bishop of Zagreb, Strossmayer, who was impressed with the young artist and commissioned 2 paintings from him. In 1873, at the World Exhibition in Vienna, Vojtěch met with fellow artists and saw works of French academic painters, which left a great impression on him. He decided to go to Paris, and in 1878, with the recommendation from Bishop Strossmayer, to seek out the painter and his friend Jaroslav Kermak, but found him already too ill to help. However, he approached Paul Baudry, an eminent painter of the time, who in turn recommended him to study with Jean-Léon Gérôme at the Paris Academy. From 1878 he studied with Gérôme at the Ecole des beaux-arts in Paris, but he was chiefly influenced by Paul Baudry, who had distinguished himself by the splendid paintings of the Opera House, and was then regenerating French decorative painting in a new direction, more and more towards linear design and vivid colouring. Baudry employed him when painting the Marriage of Psyche for the ceiling of Vanderbilt's palace. The grateful Vojtěch, his exceptional pupil, then well looked after in his studio, his master's palette and easel as a sign of his veneration. The deep respect of the student to his master was never forgotten from those early days. In the Parisian capital there was one thing to which it was not necessary for Baudry to draw his attention to, the delicate and somewhat decadent beauty of Parisian women. Vojtěch became an enthusiastic painter of them. Lively Paris, with its pure bright colouring, the Latin joy and exquisiteness of the culture, in nature, in galleries, in cafes, and of the arts. He purposed in his art, which he brilliantly acted upon, the further development of Czech art, that he sought to make in it his own, fresh viewpoint and a renewed interpretation, as in those of his pictures which comprised his contribution to the decorations in the National Theatre at Prague. In the meanwhile, however, the plein-air movement was completely gaining ground in Paris, and Hynais soon identified himself with it. All the more so since he was able to leave the studio in the Place Pigalle, in the same house where Puvis de Chavannes, with whom he was on friendly terms, had produced his paintings, and could now establish himself in the premises of his own on the slopes of Montmartre, where he could paint in the open air in the garden. But Hynais was also a keen observer of contemporary things, and his Parisian portraits will bear comparison with those of Baudry. His picture entitled Truth, which was produced at that time, became a starting point for his subsequent work, and his large painting, The Judgment of Paris, which followed later, was distinguished by the manner in which the blue sky and the green vegetation are reflected upon the flesh of the living models in the midst of nature. A specimen of the preparatory studies for this picture, the painting entitled Paris, which was exhibited in Prague in the 90s, aroused great enthusiasm among the young Czech painters of the time. One of them, who became a professor, was Svabinsky, the rector of the Prague Academy of Fine Arts, who recalls the impressions which it left on him. There was perfection in all of it, but chiefly in the beautiful head of the youth, who was almost girlish, crowned with a Phrygian cap of a rich red colour. This red colouring on the head of the youth, seated in the shadow under the open sky, produced an altogether magical impression. When Vojtěch became professor at the Prague Academy of Fine Arts in 1894, the pupils crowded into his studio. That was a memorable time for our academy, records Svabinsky. Thus, Vojtěch is a significant figure in the history of Czech art, not only on account of his work, but also because of his influence as a teacher upon the artists of the generation at the close of the 19th century. In the course of time, the later generation followed other influences, but Hynais continued unwearied upon the path he had chosen. He had only one sound eye, and it was perhaps for this reason that he watched so cautiously over the exactitude of the designing and painting in what he produced. He was an exponent of plein air painting, but he was not an impressionist. He subjected what he had observed to an unending process of revision, and in the evening he erased the work he had finished during the day, only to begin afresh the next morning. In this way he produced purely personal works, the exactitude of which was almost scientific, and which were unconnected with the artistic formulas current around him. In the meanwhile, however, the master had been occupied for many years with a large canvas containing a picture of the Passion. Pilate of Judea is represented there, leading Christ scourged and crowned with thorns before the furious rabble, ecce homo. But Vojtěch Hynais did not complete this great work for which he had made such elaborate preparation. His last work was a portrait of President Masaryk, yet even this, in spite of its perfection, he regarded only as a preliminary study for a final portrait. He lived to see the national celebrations at the time of his 70th birthday, when he received the honorary degree of Doctor of Philosophy from the Caroline University of Prague. Then, however, the infirmities which had already undermined his health were suddenly manifested in an unmistakable manner. He was buried on the 26th of September, 1925, in the Vyšehrad, that cemetery which forms the hallowed summit of Prague, in the mausoleum which, under the name of Slavin, has been prepared as a tribute gravesite for all famous Czechs. And finally, we hope you enjoyed this presentation and subscribe for more in the future. It will help our channel to grow. Thank you.